Blog Talk Radio.
Well, here we go, ladies and gentlemen, across this great country. We've just finished Barrel Radio with Marianne Costello, the guest out there, David Finoli, talking Pittsburgh sports and everything, brought back memories. And now we get into the second show and move over Indians, move over Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This is the American Sports History Podcast hosted by my good friend Peter Ray. It's on blogtalkradio.com/Mancini Sports, all the podcast platforms, and it's now being powered by Mancini Media. There's a lot of things coming in February with this fine network. Without further ado, yours truly turning it over to Peter. First of all, Peter, as I give you the red carpet, the podium, and the mic, how are you? Second of all, how can people reach you? And third of all, boy, do you have a guest today.
Hi, Mark. I'm fine, and I have a YouTube channel. It's my name, Peter J. Ray, R-E-A. I also have a website. It's called Adventures in History with Peter J. Ray at peterjray.com. We've made 171 Cleveland baseball videos every year in Cleveland baseball history, going back to 1869, including the 20 Negro League seasons. You're absolutely right about tonight's guest. He is from Brooklyn, New York. He currently lives in Half Moon Bay, California. And he was in the time and place, one of the most magical times and places in baseball history at age 19. Brooklyn, New York in 1955, which if I could travel in time, I'd love to go back to that moment when the Brooklyn Dodgers won the World Series. He followed the Dodgers to California and has been an L.A. Dodgers since the early 60s. He had a 30-year career as a photographer. And then at age 68, he went into acting and toured the country performing as Ty Cobb. And this is a wonderful, tremendous thing that he did for all those years. And because, of course, Cobb is such an important part of baseball history. So we are – and he's retired from performing Ty Cobb. He has a book out, Mascots in Baseball, children's book about, I believe, minor league mascots. He's also currently has a new project involving, I believe, major league mascots. Welcome. It's an honor and a privilege to have on the show tonight Mr. Norm Coleman.
Well, it's an honor to be here. Thank you very much, Peter, for giving me the opportunity to speak to your friends out there in Cleveland.
Right. Well, now I know you're a guy or you're a man, even though you've gotten into history. But so we also have to live in the present. Could you tell us about your book, Mascots in Baseball, that came out, I believe, this year?
It came out early in November. I started working on the book 2 years ago. I knew a lot of general managers throughout minor league baseball. I interviewed some of them when I worked for a couple of baseball magazines. So when I wrote to those that I knew and asked them to send me a photograph of their mascot and a bio and a logo, and a good half a dozen, 10 did. And when I realized I was getting a response, I then wrote to about another 100 general managers, and eventually 78 responded. So 78 minor league baseball teams are in the book.
But you did get the San Diego Chicken in there, is that right?
I'm afraid not. We didn't get the Chicken in, nor the Philly Fanatic, because they're not in the minor leagues playing baseball today or mascotting today. But they are in the Hall of Fame, which is located in Whiting, Indiana, the mascot Baseball Hall of Fame. They are members along with others, but no, they are not in my book. Maybe next year. I'm working on book 2, so we'll get them in book 2.
So book 2 will be a Major League Baseball mascots, is that correct?
Yes, I'm planning on calling it Mascots in Sports, which will be a combination of minor league teams, major league teams, and some of the mascots who are in the Hall of Fame in Whiting, Indiana.
Well, that's an interesting topic that you picked. You started with the minor league baseball mascots, and off the top of my head, I can't think of one. How did you happen to come up with that topic for your first book to write?
Well, it's an interesting story because when I was a child growing up in New York or Brooklyn, my brother and his wife took me to the circus at Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus in Madison Square Garden, and I loved the circus. Who doesn't love a circus? I loved the clowns. I was just taken by the clowns. And one night I was thinking about going to the circus and the clowns, and I wondered, gee, do baseball teams have mascots? I didn't even know they did. And that's when I started writing to the GMs, and that's when I found that, yes, they do have mascots.
But you picked the minor league teams first.
Yes, I did. I did pick them because I knew quite a few general managers throughout the minor leagues, and since they responded, I stuck with it. But I also know a couple of GMs in the major league teams, so I'm beginning to send them some letters and some information to see if they will be interested in having their team in the next book 2.
How did you said you knew minor league owners, baseball owners. How did you happen to know them?
Because I interviewed quite a few general managers and a few presidents for a couple of baseball teams, online baseball teams, years ago, and quite a few of them enabled me to send them questions by email. I asked them questions, they answered, and eventually I would talk to them and write the story. And it went out to the team on the internet.
How many copies have been printed?
Of my book?
Yes.
My book, 500.
500. Okay. Will there be a second printing?
I hope so.
Wait and see, right?
Well, when the minor league baseball season starts in May of next year, most of the teams have told me they want the books in their team store. I've already sold a bunch of books to 3 different teams, and so when the baseball season starts, I hope to have teams in the team store when baseball starts in May.
Now let's shift gears and talk about what I think is just an incredible thing, the 13 years you spent bringing Ty Cobb back to life. Can you talk about that whole experience?
Well, it was a lot of researching, reading all kinds of books, writing the script, and rehearsing the script. I started doing Rotary clubs and Lions and Kiwanis clubs in the San Francisco Bay Area to get some idea if what I wrote was acceptable. And I learned a lot from speaking to the public. But eventually, I made a contact with Mr. Christopher Ilitch of the Detroit Tigers, and I told him I was Ty Cobb, can they help me out? Well, at first they said no, but eventually Mr. Ilitch, the son of the old man Ilitch, who passed away a few years ago, said, I'm going to introduce you to David Dombrowski, who then was the president and general manager of the team, and he introduced me to Ron Myers, and the next thing you knew, I was down in Lakeland, Florida, performing my first show outside of California. That was the start of a 14-year tour of the country.
How did you happen to pick Ty Cobb?
That's a good question. People often ask me, why did you pick him? Why don't you pick Babe Ruth? And I said, well, I happened to go to the library one day in Half Moon Bay, and I was looking for a book about Jackie Robinson, and right next to Jackie Robinson, clearly misfiled, was a book about Ty Cobb. So the only thing I knew about Ty Cobb was he was a great ball player back in the olden days, dead ball era, but I knew nothing about him, zero, except he was a great hitter, and he won lots of batting titles. I took the book home, started reading it, liked it, got a second book, and then a third book. I was hooked because I saw him as being a very interesting character, very complex man, very misunderstood man, but one of the greatest ball players that ever played the game. First player elected into the Hall of Fame, 1936.
I take my hat off to you. The 367 average, and to me, baseball is entertainment, and from what I've read, when Cobb would get on first, everyone would pay attention because you didn't know what he was going to do, and so that makes baseball fun. Everybody, the pitcher, everyone wakes up. The pitcher, the catcher, the second base, shortstop, everybody's thinking, he's going to take off. So, entertaining player, and the fans. So, can you tell us? Do you have any anecdotes about Ty Cobb you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, I'd like to tell you a little bit about when Cobb was a young man. Growing up in Royston, Georgia, he said I was born with a competitive spirit. I was a natural born show off. When I was a child playing children's games, don't you know, I always had to win. I had to be the best. I had to finish first. I threw stones further, shouted louder, climbed trees higher, and ran faster. I even bet my little buddies I could be further, and I did.
Of course, the Charles Learson and your show, Charles Learson biography, set the record straight. And although there's still, I think, probably a lot of people affected by the movie Cobb and the book by the unfortunate book by Al Stump, but. I lost my train of thought here. The thing that got me was one thing that I came across was Ty Cobb playing poker in the White House when Warren Harding was president. Did you come across that?
I don't know about Warren Harding, but I do know Mr. Wilson. And at the beginning of World War I, when Ty went to the White House, and he knew who Wilson was. Wilson had been president of the University of Princeton and had been born in Augusta, and Cobb gave him a tour of Augusta. So the president wanted old men to join the military at the end of World War I. Cobb said, I want to volunteer, and he was accepted. And he joined the Chemical Warfare Service and was teaching soldiers in Paris how to not die by breathing in the gas which the Germans used. So that's what he taught.
It's interesting. Cobb has the famous. I see your photograph. The famous batting grip where his hands are separated on the bat. And people. I guess I thought that Cobb swung like that, but apparently, depending on the pitch. He would either, if he thought he had to slap the ball, he would bring the lower hand up, and then if he was trying to really hit the ball harder, he would bring the upper hand down. Is that your? So his hands were together when he hit the ball. Is that correct?
Yes, he did move his hands both up and down depending on who was pitching, what the field looked like, who were the infielders, who were the outfielders, and he also moved his feet. A little bit in the batter's box. So no one really knew where he would hit it. He might hit it to left, he could hit it to center, he could hit it to right. He had complete control of the field, which a lot of players don't do, but he certainly did.
Was he and his wife divorced? Were they divorced?
Yes, they had 5 children, 3 boys, 2 girls, and they raised them in Augusta, Georgia, but eventually he moved the family to Palo Alto, California, and that's where he raised the family there. Eventually they had marital issues, and eventually they had a divorce.
One of the stories I liked about Cobb was when he showed up in Joe Jackson's hometown and Jackson's store. I think he had a grocery store or something, and walked in the door, and then Jackson didn't respond, and then Cobb said, "Well, Joe, don't you know me?" And and Jackson said, "Yeah, I know you, but I didn't know if you knew me." And of course, so he was that was a nice thing he did, going in there to see this guy who'd been, considered, anathema, thrown out of baseball. So that was a nice gesture. He was sticking up for another guy from the South.
Well, Cobb also thoroughly believed that Shoeless Joe got a bad deal. Yes, he took approximately $500 from some gamblers, but he couldn't sign the paper because he didn't know how to sign his name. He signed it with an X. But when the players went to court in Chicago, they were all found not guilty. Chandler, the new commissioner of baseball, Kenneth Mountain Landis, found all those guys guilty, so they could never play baseball again. And what Cobb did, he did support not only Jackson, but several other ball players who, as you know, did not have Social Security in those days. They didn't have pensions. They wasted their money on various things. And he supported quite a few ball players, including Jackson. But he never told the wife that he put the money up. It was always provided to the wife or the player by a third person, not by Cobb.
Go ahead.
But it was his money. It was his money.
Did Cobb become friends with Napoleon Lajoie?
He certainly knew him because they were obviously both great hitters, and they had that one year in which they battled for the championship to get the most valuable car they could get at the time. It was a gorgeous car, 1915, I think it was. And they wound up basically in a tie, and LaJoie, to win the batting title, pretty much bunted down the third base line, doubleheader, and got 7 hits, putting him ahead of Cobb by a point or two. But the commissioner said, no, that's cheating. Cobb should win the title, and Cobb did win the title, not LaJoie.
I'd like to talk about Brooklyn, 1955. You were 19, you were there, and you were a Brooklyn Dodgers fan. And to me, that's, I think, probably my favorite if I look at baseball overall. I think the greatest moment in baseball history when the Brooklyn Dodgers won the 1955 World Series. And do you want to talk about that summer, the summer of 55, and the 1955 Brooklyn Dodgers World Series champions?
Absolutely. And as a Dodger fan, every year we seem to lose to the New York Yankees, whether it was 41, where I was too young, but I learned about that one, but it was 47, 49, 52, 53. And so in Brooklyn, we had a saying, wait till next year. Well, next year was 55. And I can tell you, me and my friends, we ran out into the street yelling and screaming and cheering, and never been so happy in all my life. That was an amazing, amazing thing. Little did we know that 2 years later, the Dodgers would move to Los Angeles.
I read the biography of Duke Snider, and I love the ending because he put in capital letters, "The Brooklyn Dodgers still live. The Ebbets Field still stands."
Well, it
nice.
did stand for a few years, come down for an apartment complex. Probably about 4 or 5 years later, it was torn down.
Yeah, I guess he was talking about in memory. That's what I love about history. People are like, what the heck? A lot of people that are not into history, but to me, it's very real, and I think that's what he was trying to say. Because I believe he wrote that after it had been torn down.
I think so.
Let's talk about the late '70s L.A. Dodgers, because that's actually what I remember well. Although, to me, I always thought Tommy Lasorda was just a tremendous part of baseball. His spirit, and they lost 2 World Series in a row. How did you experience Reggie Jackson's 3 home runs in Game 6 of the '77 World Series?
I almost threw up. I was working in my studio at the time, doing some work when Jackson came up and hit the first home run. Okay, give him one. Then he came up and had a second home run. I'm not too happy. But when he came up a third time and hit the home run, I could have picked up a camera and thrown it up against the wall. I didn't do that, but I was angry, but admired him for what he did. That's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, it's funny how the passage of time changes our perspective, because in the 70s I was a Cleveland Indians fan. I was rooting for Cleveland. We were in the same division, and back then we played the Yankees more than now. I don't know, they've changed things, but and so I was frustrated, and I hated the Yankees. That's part of the tradition in a lot of places, and I hated Reggie Jackson. But now I look back, and I have a very fond feeling for him, and that doesn't, of course, I wasn't a Dodgers fan, so it didn't hurt me that. Although I didn't like the Yankees winning the World Series. But now I have very fond feelings for Reggie Jackson. That's nice how as changes, the time helps change our attitudes about things.
Absolutely. I'll tell you a little story about Reggie Jackson. As you know, I was a very well-known wedding photographer. My studio lasted 30 years. We had a tremendous studio, very well-known. I was photographing a bride one day in Burlingame, California, and I noticed I had to change film in my camera, and I noticed there was an African-American gentleman sitting on a bench about 5 feet from me, and that's where my camera was. So I went over there, and I looked up at him, and he looked at me, and I knew who he was. Immediately, I said to myself, that's Reggie Jackson. So I asked the bride and groom, would you like to get a picture with Reggie? And they said, no, he's our guest. We don't want you to bother him, so don't ask him for autographs. Don't take his picture unless he asks you. So the only picture I took of him was when he was dancing with the maid of honor.
So what are your memories of Tommy Lasorda?
Well, I don't have a whole lot, except I admired him very much for what he did. You know, he followed Walter Alston, who managed the Dodgers, 1 year at a time. The Dodgers didn't believe in giving a manager a 2-year or 3-year contract, so it was 1 year at a time. When Lasorda came along, he followed the tradition, I believe he did, and so. But he managed them for, I would say, 16, 18 years. But all that I do remember of him is seeing the Dodgers play the Giants in Candlestick Park at the time. And Lasorda liked to walk from the clubhouse to the dugout. Booed him. You couldn't believe the booing. And he loved it. He said, come on, give me some more. Give me some more. He waved his cap. He was a character. Yeah,
I came across, I think there was a game, Dave Kingman hit 3 home runs against the Dodgers. I don't know who he's playing, maybe the Mets or whoever, but and they asked, some reporter asked Lasorda after, what do you think of Kingman hitting 3 home runs? And he went off on this tirade full of the F word, which, I won't repeat any of that, but it's just funny, It was just funny as heck. Funny guy.
Well, I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, but Willie Mays hit 4 home runs in a game one time for the Giants.
Oh yeah, I think it's very unusual, and and a number of guys have done that as well. How about Fernando Valenzuela in 1981?
Let me tell you my Fernando story, because when he first came up to the Dodgers at that time from Mexico, and he came off with a 7-game winning streak. And we got to play in the Candlestick Park that night. I never went to Candlestick Park. It's crazy. It's so freezing cold and windy, so I never went to a night game. But with Valenzuela playing, I went to that game last night, bundled up, and watched Valenzuela win his 8th consecutive start against the Giants.
Cleveland signed Oral Hershiser. I think we had him from like 94 to 97, and that was such a cool thing because, the guy from the 88 World Series, I think he was on the mound when it ended. You want to talk about Oral Hershiser, 1988?
Another great pitcher, post Sandy Koufax. great pitcher. I hope the Dodgers win the World Series in, I believe, 1988 against the Oakland A's. I went to a game that day. I didn't see him pitch, but the Dodgers won that series against the Oakland A's. That's the game that Kirk Gibson hit that great home run when he couldn't barely walk or run. He hit the pinch hit home run against the great Oakland A's reliever, and the Dodgers won that game and eventually won the World Series against the A's that year, 1988. And in 1989, went to the World Series against the Giants and the A's again. That was the Earthquake World Series. That was the year the big earthquake hit San Francisco.
Now let's go back to who was your favorite player on the '55 Brooklyn Dodgers?
I had several. Jackie Robinson was one for sure. Pee Wee Reese, I loved Pee Wee because he was short. I loved that nickname. That's when I discovered nicknames. He was Pee Wee Reese. My friends called me Pee Wee Norm. I loved him. And of course Campanella, the catcher, Duke Snyder, outfield, Paul Ferrillo, right field, Gene Hemansky, not very famous, but played left field. Later on, Andy Pafko came to the Dodgers from the Chicago Cubs. And it was Pafko who was standing against the wall, hoping to catch the ball that Bobby Thompson hit, which wound up in the stands and gave the Giants the pennant that year, 1950. What was it? 51. Thank you. Yeah.
And were you listening to the game on the radio in your home?
I listened on the radio. We were too poor to have a TV, so I listened to it on the radio.
You know, one of the sad things I read about was, I think it was the '56 World Series. Game 7 was in Brooklyn, as I remember, and Don Newcomb, who I think won the Cy Young, started, and he got bombed. And they took him out, and I think they lost. Dodgers lost badly, and then he was so distraught he left Ebbets Field and was driving all over Brooklyn and I felt so sorry for the guy. You know, that's really tough. You know, it's game, and you win the Cy Young, and then do you remember that?
Well, he was a great pitcher. I think he won 27 games that year. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he did lose the game of the World Series. In fact, I remember running home from school to turn on the game. In I think it was the 9th inning, when I believe it was Newcomb was pitching, and Tommy Henrich, the old reliable for the Yankees, came up, and he hit the home run that beat Newcomb, and he was unhappy. Newcomb was.
So, yeah, you want to talk about Jackie Robinson and Did you see him play, and did you see the excitement in the game, or when he would get on first? And maybe that's why you did Ty Cobb, because those two guys had a lot in common. These two very exciting players. When they would get on, everyone would watch, you know, and because nobody knew if they would take off on any pitch.
Well, I was a big fan of Jackie Robinson. I was also very young. I was only 11 years old at that time. So, but what I remember him doing. It was he who helped the Dodgers put the team together and win the pennant that year. In fact, several of the Dodger players who were bigoted and didn't want Robinson to be on the team, they vowed to go on strike if they did. Leo DeRocha, who was the manager at that time, said, listen, Jackie Robinson is going to get us all to the World Series, so mind your Q's and T's. And so they did. But the following year, all those guys were traded from the Dodgers.
That's a nice story about Leo DeRocher, who often gets criticized a lot for. Nobody's perfect for the '69 Mets and for. He had trouble with Cesar Cedeno in Houston when he was really too old. But that's a nice thing and of course he played a major role for Willie Mays with the Giants. Now. The other thing I wanted to bring up was that they show it in the movie 42 with about Jackie Robinson when Robinson's being booed and these the N-words being thrown at him. And Pee Wee Reese, it's in Cincinnati, and he's from Kentucky. He's from nearby, and he goes over, puts his arm around Robinson, and this is one of the great moments in world history, I think.
Yes, and a true story. In fact, eventually they made a statue of that. I'm not sure it's in Cincinnati, it may be in Brooklyn, but there's a statue of that. I've seen pictures of it, so that was very, very, very emotional. And of course, let's talk about Branch Rickey for a moment, because it was Branch Rickey who brought Jackie Robinson to Brooklyn. And I can tell you that in my show, I say, Ty Cobb says, 15 of the 16 owners of major league teams did not want a black man to play baseball, but Branch Rickey did. And the reason he brought him in, because he heard how great a player he was, football player, basketball player, track, baseball, all of that kind of stuff. And they sent him to Montreal. 1 year later, he was in Brooklyn. But Branch Rickey is a businessman. He knew if he had Jackie Robinson in the stands, a lot of African-American folks are going to show up, they're going to buy tickets, and they're going to sell a lot of tickets to both white and black people. Abbott Field was always sold out. You couldn't get a ticket for Abbott Field.
Yeah, and in 48, Cleveland signed Satchel Paige. I think he had 200,000 fans for his first 3 starts, and he and Larry Doby played major roles in Cleveland. That's our last World Series championship. Our guest tonight has been the author of Mascots in Baseball, a guy who has spent 14 years traveling around doing a Ty Cobb show. We're out of time, Mr. Norm Coleman. Do you have any final words for our listeners?
Well, I would like to let people know, if they're interested in purchasing the Mascots in Baseball, you can go to my website, www.ncoleman, COLEMAN.info. And if you want the Ty Cobb book, the Ty Cobb book is on Amazon.com. It's The Life and Times of Ty Cobb. But my website, once again, is www.ncoleman.info to buy the book, Mascots in Baseball.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Norm Coleman. It's been an honor and a privilege to have you on the show. Dear listeners, next week's guest will be Michael Boyd, the brother of Dennis Oil Can Boyd, who was part of the 86 Boston Red Sox, so that'll be a lot of fun. Dear listener, may the road rise to meet you. May the wind be at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face and rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Good night, everybody. Thanks again, Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, God bless you.
Thank you. You too.
Okay.